Hello, everyone. Good evening. I think we're ready to begin. Good evening. My name is Raz Siegel. It was a pleasure over the last year or so to correspond with many of you, and it's a pleasure now to open this evening and welcome you to the 5th Global Conference of the International Network of Genocide Scholars. This conference has been in the making for almost 4 years, since I suggested the idea to INOG's president, Professor Jürgen Zimmerl, when he was here in Jerusalem in September 2012. And since we set out on the path of organizing this conference, particularly in the last 2 years, it has been a bumpy road, with many objections, obstacles, and many who expressed displeasure at the project. And accordingly, moments when it seemed that it was destined to fail. And yet, here we are, and it is, I believe, significant that we've made it. For Jerusalem offers an ideal venue to hold some of the central discussions and debate in the field of genocide studies in 2016. One of them stands at the center of this conference, the encounter of Holocaust scholarship and the study of genocide and related events and processes of mass violence. Jerusalem was one of the central locations where Holocaust studies emerged some 5 decades ago, and it is here, it is here that this encounter today generates no small amount of controversy that in turn prompts new questions and suggests challenging insights in the field. Some of the controversy stems from discomfort, not to mention rejection of the idea of joining the words Holocaust and genocide together. But some also relates to where we are, here in Israel and Jerusalem in particular, where histories of mass violence, collective traumas, and an ongoing violent conflict all render scholarly discussions in our field particularly difficult and emotionally loaded. But it is no reason to avoid the discussions and exchanges. If at all, it is reason enough to hold them here and now. This conference, however, is designed to reflect not only this particular local context, but the ways in which genocide studies has grown in the last 2 decades to become a truly interdisciplinary and rich field of research encompassing diverse case studies throughout human history and related fields, especially international law, transitional justice, and human rights. So there is indeed much to present and discuss and debate in the following days, and it is therefore very much important to thank a number of institutions and people who took part in the organization of this conference and contributed immensely, and without whom and without which we would simply not be opening this conference today. First and foremost, my thanks and our thanks in the name of the whole organizing committee to the International Network of Genocide Scholars, to the organization that accepted our submission for the site and went along and supported us to bring us to this day. Our partners from the very beginning, the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, the office here in Tel Aviv, the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, who also joined very early on and helped and contributed and supported. And within the Hebrew University, many centers and institutes, first and foremost among them the Avraham Herman Institute of Contemporary Jewry, the Leonard Davis Institute, the Truman Institute for the Advancement of Peace, the Richard Kobner Minerva Center for German History, the Vidal Sassoon International Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism, the Louis Freeberg Center for East Asian Studies. All the members of the committee are also deserve a lot of gratitude, but in particular, I'd like to mention Professor Daniel Blattman, the head of the organizing committee, and my good friend and colleague, Amos Goldberg, who did so much and all the time, and somehow we also survived the exchanges between us, which were not always simple. Beside that, there were other partners outside of the Hebrew University, the Open University of Israel, Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, the Stephen Roth Institute for the Study of Anti-Semitism at Tel Aviv University, the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, and last but by no means least, the Armenian community here in Jerusalem, who also supported and helped us greatly in the organization of the conference, specifically George Hindlian, who's sitting right here. Thank you very much. And finally, two people who really attended to the many details and problems and unforeseen developments. Hanoch Wolfe from the Leonard Davis Institute, who really, without whom never would have managed to find my way through the maze of the bureaucracy of the Hebrew University and other institutes and to bring this project together. And Dalia Sagi of the Institute of Contemporary Jewry both did a great job. I don't see them. Are they here? In any way, thank you very, very much. Really, we would not be sitting here without you. That's it for me. There'll be a lot of talking further ahead, so I'd like to now invite Professor Daniel Blattman, the head of the organizing committee, to say a few words as well.
Thank you, Raz. His Excellency, Mr. Adama Dieng, Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide to the UN Secretary General, Professor Menahem Ben Sasson, President of the Hebrew University, distinguished colleagues, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen. The 5th Global Conference of the International Network of Genocide Scholars, which opens today, marks a milestone and differs from all those that preceded it. I'm not referring to the record number of participants or the impressive variety of topics to be addressed. Rather, it is a high point in the effort which has lasted nearly a decade ago to get the Hebrew University to adopt the academic and educational philosophy that my colleagues and I strive to install the students who come here to study the history of the Holocaust and genocide. When my dear friends, Dr. Raz Siegel, approached me some 2 years ago and suggested bringing the INEX conference to Jerusalem, my first reaction was no way. There is no way this will wash. Nobody will come. Israel in 2060 is not the most natural site in the world for an international conference on genocide, violence against minorities, and human rights. But maybe that is precisely why Raz, with much persistence and skill, not to mention a vast faith, that holding such a conference in Jerusalem has a special public significance that transcends the Israeli scene, persuaded us to climb abroad. And then he steered this ship like an expert and brought us to this opening session. Why is this a milestone? The number of academic conferences, workshops, guest lectures, symposia, and seminars on the Holocaust that have taken place in Israel must be in the thousands. Many of them were major and trailblazing events, but I doubt whether there have been even 24 that dealt with genocide. In 1982, Professor Israel Cherny organized the first conference on genocide at Tel Aviv University. He ran into serious difficulties as a result of Turkish diplomatic pressure to cancel the conference, because it also addressed the Armenian genocide. The conference did take place in the end, but this pressure continued and has affected later attempts at scholarly discussions of this topic in Israel. It is hard to name a major international event on genocide that has taken place in an Israeli university since then. We occasionally have guest lectures by foreign scholar or a modest symposium, but not much more. There were almost no courses on the subject. Professor Yair Oron developed and taught one for other graduates at the Open University with remarkable success, but there were no courses or research tracks for graduate students who would go on to deal with the Holocaust and genocide from a broad, comparative, and critical perspective. This situation is now changing, not only here in Jerusalem, but at other Israeli universities as well. This conference is making an unparalleled contribution to this welcome development. Though we cannot claim to be the first to organize a conference on genocide, I might modestly suggest that we can make such an assertion with regard to the conference whose title includes the collocation Holocaust, Genocide, and Mass Violence, with the goal of generating a dialogue among these phenomena. This is the first conference, certainly in Israel, that will feature panels both on the Jewish order police in the Kovne ghetto and on patterns of violence in settler colonialism, both on the Holocaust in Polish poetry, literature, and historiography, and on the place of religion in modern genocide, on current manifestations of anti-Semitism, and on the Armenian nation during the post-genocide period, on the genocide of the Herero and the Nama in Namibia, and on aspects of mass violence during the First World War, on the legacy and memory of the Holocaust in Israel, and on manifestations of draft resistance and the state of human rights organization in Israel, on the motivations of the Nazi murderer, and on gender aspects of modern genocide. And this list covers scarcely 10% of the incredible variety of overlapping topics of the panel's discussions to be held over the coming 3 days. We choose intersections as the title of the conference. For many years, Holocaust research in Israel was distinct and separate from the study of historical phenomenon of which it is an integral part, modern genocide. There are diverse and important reasons for this situation, and they should not be dismissed lightly. The person who best expressed the reigning attitude toward the Holocaust in Israel and many parts of the Jewish world is Elie Wiesel. In 1978, he wrote the following about the American television series Holocaust, and I quote, "The Holocaust is unique, not just another event. The series treats the Holocaust as if it were just another event. Auschwitz cannot be explained, nor can be visualized. The Holocaust transcends history. The Holocaust is the ultimate event, the ultimate mystery, never be comprehended or transmitted. Only those who were there know what it was. The others will never know," end quote. The pioneer Jewish Holocaust scholars and historians who created a field of study that had not existed before the 1960s adopted an approach similar to that. Of course, they studied and wrote Holocaust history and did not seek to turn it into a mystery. Nevertheless, for several decades, the Holocaust cast forbidding shadow on those who sought to examine it in a historical context broader than that of the Second World War, the Nazi regime, anti-Semitism, and Jewish history. Today, it is something hard to understand the reason for this approach, which was so self-evident until just a decade or two ago. Reading what Jacob Katz, one of the greatest modern Jewish historians and among the most important scholars to teach at this university, wrote in 1983, we can understand how difficult it was then to understand the Holocaust in a context that was not wholly rooted in Jewish history and centuries of anti-Semitic hostility. And I quote from Katz, "The current tendency to de-Judaize anti-Semitism is most evident in many recent attempts to universalize and culminating event of historical anti-Semitism, the Holocaust by citing other examples of genocide and by pointing out that other groups also suffered at the hands of the Nazis. Ultimately, however, the suffering of no other nation can compare with the uniqueness of Jewish experience, and not just in the Nazi period. This is true not simply because of the amount of suffering entailed, but also because of its frightening recurrence over time, which lends it the character of utter inescapability. So Holocaust research in Israel became a persistent dialogue between academic historiography and the shaping of the independent national Jewish experience, modern Jewish identity, and an intensive engagement with anti-Semitism as a phenomenon that must be understood before the Holocaust can be fathomed. It is hard to overstate the importance of this scholarly harvest, without which the Holocaust would have remained solely in the province of German and European historiography. But the late 19th century, and particularly the genocide of the 1990s, challenged traditional concept of genocide studies and had an impact on Holocaust research as well. I believe that the turning point came with the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, which undermined the view that the Holocaust was a unique event in the bloody annal of modern genocide. This is not the place to discuss the terrible tragedy, but it is no coincidence that many scholars have concluded that the Rwandan genocide and the Holocaust are the two paradigmatic cases of genocide in the 20th century. In 1994, some 3 months after the end of the genocide in Rwanda, I began teaching the history of the Holocaust at the Hebrew University's Institute of Contemporary Jewry. I remember that precisely when I was delivering my first lecture on Polish Jewry during the Holocaust, the evening news broadcasts were full of horrifying pictures of slaughtered Tutsis. I remember the questions asked by my young students who did not know how to deal with the fact that the very atrocities they were reading about in diaries and testimonies by Jews were now being aired on television. I too, as a novice instructor, did not know how to handle the intersection of past and present. Until only a few years ago, however, the Hebrew University did not offer a single course on the Rwandan genocide, or any other genocide for that matter. But things are changing, even if the process is neither natural nor rapid. Refashioning Holocaust studies in Israel academia as Holocaust, genocide, and mass violence studies is not merely a matter of introducing new courses, replacing one syllabus or another, or adding new faculty positions, something that is almost never approved, as we know. The people most open to this change are our young students, who frequently complain that they are not able to study what they think they should. Behind these technicalities, however, there is also a problem of mindset. It requires transitioning from a key field of Jewish history, long anchored in its own conceptual framework, to a domain that maintains an open and critical dialogue between Jewish history and world history, that draws on multiple disciplines, and that creates interactions between scholars raised in academic traditions who are examining different events that took place in different places. This is the main reason why this conference aroused special excitement for my colleagues and me. It is a milestone whose fruits I hope we will enjoy not only during this exceptional experience we will all share these next few days, but even more so in the years to come. I wish you all 3 days of open and fascinating academic dialogue. I now ask the chair of our tonight's session, Professor René Poznański from Ben-Gurion University, to come on stage. Thank you.
His Excellency Adama Dieng, United Nations Secretary General Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide, Professor Menachem Ben-Sasson, President of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Professor Gabriel Motzkin, Director of the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, Professor Jürgen Zimmerer, President of the International Network of Genocide Scholars, dear colleagues and guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is a pleasure and a great honor to chair this opening session of the 5th Global Conference on Genocide organized by the INOGs here at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Threats of genocide, or more generally, threats of atrocity crimes, have not disappeared from the world. The never again hope sounds too often like a wishful thinking. Michael Ignatieff has provided one of the possible explanations for this upsetting observation, and I'm quoting him. Genocide is not just a murderous madness, he wrote. It is more deeply a politics that promises a utopia beyond politics. One people, one land, one truth, the end of difference. Since genocide is a form of political utopia, it remains an enduring temptation in any multi-ethnic and multicultural society in crisis. End of quote. Can knowledge be the answer? In Europe as well as in the US, Holocaust and genocide research is booming, as do the expressions of Holocaust memory, whose development is regarded by some as the ultimate tool to prevent future genocides. A thorough knowledge of the past based on a multidisciplinary research by the academic community, combined with a deep awareness in the society at large of the human price of those atrocities, and with an adequate reaction of the international community, are believed to help blocking the way for future atrocity crimes. Does it really work? Maybe in some cases. Yet, the relevance of focusing on atrocity crimes in a world in which genocidal situations are not rare, and the belief that everything must be done to put an end to this unacceptable fact, explains the extensive scope of any conference of Holocaust and genocide. Europe, Africa, Asia. Unfortunately, the entire world provides the geographic framework for the relevant studies. Chronologically, neither the past nor the present can be ignored. Speaking of disciplines, historians, sociologists, anthropologists, and political scientists help us understand the motivation of the perpetrators, the fate of the victims, the political context before, during, and after, and the characteristics of the societies involved. A second level of analysis introduces us to the ways through which those horrific events are being transmitted in each country using its cultural tools by the historians, by the media, by artists, or manipulated by politicians in order to strengthen the legitimacy of their policy. Last but not least, experts in law shed light on the evolution of the international community or of different societies who faced a post-genocidal situation. The extraordinarily rich program of the different panels organized in the next days reflect the wealth of all those relevant topics, and in view of the program, we can expect an exciting intellectual experience. Allow me now to call our distinguished guest, Professor Menachem Ben-Sasson, President of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Professor Gabriel Motzkin, Director of the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, Professor Jürgen Zimmerer, President of the INOGs, to come to the stage and join me there. And now I invite Professor Menachem Ben-Sasson to address the conference.
Welcome. Preventing genocide today, applying the lessons of the past to protect future genocide activities. It's a message. Are we naive? Do we really believe that from learning the past, people automatically come to conclusions about the present and the future? This is one of the questions that we are going to ask during this conference. One of the secrets, maybe it's more than just symbolic, that so many organizations wanted and are involved in making this conference. Different ones. Diversity is the opposite of unifying. Unified, we were warned already by the chair, could be very dangerous. But the very fact that one organization and another one country and another one, participate in this conference, promise that this diversity brings the option of spaces enabling us to leave enough space for the other. Whenever you know that there are so many species, may I say, of different people, we automatically become more tolerant. Whenever we see ourselves a minority, whenever we have the perspective to each of us, never mind whether we are Americans, Canadians, Chinese, even Indians, knowing that there are places that we are the minority, this perspective could be, not necessarily promising to be, one of the options of having this space of avoiding, which will never be a promise for the future. So you came to Truman Institute. Welcome to Truman Institute. This is the very place that everybody is a minority. We deal with Americans as a minority. We deal with the Chinese as a minority, even with Israelis as a minority. Each one is a different case study for the furthering of the peace. That's the message of this building. Welcome to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. 91 years old, but a little bit more. 1918, the cornerstones were laid with one message. We want this minority of people who are not accepted to universities to be part of the world community of science, because we know and we promise to ourselves and to the world, as each of you promise, that the language of science that knows no border, no color, no religion, no nationality, nothing. It is the ultimate truth. Will be in front of us whenever we go to talk about issues. If a solution, quote unquote, will come, it's even better. But the message of the place is, let's do good science. Let's talk about everything. Let's put in criteria, perspective, documentation, theories, models at the end of this conference. And as you said, it's the beginning of another discourse. Thank you very much for coming to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, for participating in this very colorful, many organizations, but above, before, after, we know that this initial is beyond anything. It's the inogs, and we talk about it when it comes to the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Menachem Ben-Sasson, President of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And now, please, Professor Gabriel Motzkin, Director of the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute.
When I was approached with this idea, I was very enthusiastic, and I'm glad to see that it's come to fruition. Now, part of my support of it is that you're going to have to listen to me for 4 minutes. Now, I have 2 remarks to make, and the second one is longer and more important, but both of them are. First is that when perpetrators are immoral, does not make the victims more moral. Whether the victims are Tutsi, or Jews, or Armenians, they're just ordinary people, and they don't learn much from what happened to them. And I think it is the same mistake, as I will go on to say, that the Germans made, because you cannot spiritualize the victims in either direction. This is in no way to detract from the immorality of perpetrators. Now, something funny happened to me last week. I got a letter of complaint from a very eminent Israeli academic. Why am I holding this conference? It's immoral that we're doing this. It's immoral that we're talking about comparing, putting Israel in the context of Palestine. All this should not be done. And I thought about the person who did this, who wrote this letter, and I thought this man was born in 1930. And that means that for him, as for his generation, this is not history. This is not a question of how to remember. It's a question of events, and it's a question of a deep trauma, even though he wasn't there, that he underwent, because if you live through an event, you always think it could have been otherwise. Whereas if you're born after an event, you never think that. Then I thought about it a little more, and I thought, why is the Holocaust, well, I don't know if unique, but at least very rare? And the Holocaust, here's my little thesis for you. The Holocaust is very rare because the victim was imaginary. Today I heard a lecture by Michelle Touzan, and she spoke about Armenian anti-Turkish agitation in late 19th century Europe. In no way does this justify the Turks, but in fact the Armenians and the Kurds really are problems for the Turkish Republic. The Tutsi and the Hutu had a conflict that preceded what happened. The Jews were totally imaginary, and if anything they should be compared to, it's the persecution of witches in the 17th century. That's much more like it, because the witches, I hope you think so, were also imaginary. And because they were imaginary, in a way you create somebody, and as a result, you make him undergo a process of what I would call negative spiritualization, which is very much like Saul Friedlander's redemptive anti-Semitism. In other words, you spiritualize somebody negatively and you create in them a devil that is a mega-devil that's beyond all proportion. And that's why I think that it's the perpetrators who are somehow different. However, even if you believe that the Holocaust was unique or very rare, the only way you're going to be able to show that is through comparison. If you don't compare the Holocaust to something else, you're not going to be able to make that case. So those are my poor thoughts. I wish you all a very rewarding and important conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gabriel Motzkin, Director of the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. And now I call Professor Jürgen Zimmerer, President of the INOGS, to address the conference.
Okay. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, dear friends. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you all in the name of the International Network of Genocide Scholars to our 5th Global Conference on Genocide. We are very grateful to our hosts here at the Hebrew University and also our partners such as the Van Leer Institute for having made that possible. Professor Ben-Sasson, Professor Motzkin, thank you very much. I would like to use this opportunity to extend our gratitude also to our local partners and sponsors, which Raz had already listed. We couldn't hold this conference without your support. This conference, however, would not have been possible would it not have been for 3 colleagues here in Israel who worked for months, for years, tirelessly to make it happen and to overcome all obstacles, of which there were quite a few, as I understand. So last but not least, please allow me to thank Professor Daniel Blattman, Dr. Amos Goldberg, and Dr. Ras Siegel, our local steering team. "11 years after its foundation in Berlin in 2005, this meeting shows that INOGS has finally come of age. We will hear more papers than in any of our previous conferences at Sheffield, Brighton, San Francisco, or Cape Town. and we will listen to presenters from more countries than ever before. This is quite an achievement, and we, INOX, and the local steering committee have made quite some effort to assist scholars from the Global South to attend, and I'm particularly grateful for the local organizers who also were in charge of getting the funding for this assisting. My moral assistance was rather easy. We do that, this assistance, particularly because we believe in dialogue and discussion across borders, oceans, and continents. Discussion and dialogue is the essence of academic endeavor, and INOX has always understood itself as an academic association. We are not a political pressure group. Our main purpose is not to shape policy in one way or the other, but instead to provide academic evidence for those who have to make political decisions. Jerusalem seems to be a good place for discussion, to avoid the silence and the breakdown of communication, which all too often precludes violence. In order to offer a forum for debate, a certain neutrality is necessary. INOX has followed this rule from its inception. Some have misinterpreted and misrepresented this as a certain bias against specific political positions, but they couldn't be more wrong. The absence of a bias is not a bias in itself. I am pleased to be here today with so many of my colleagues, a clear sign of the absence of any bias. In the last days, we were simultaneously accused of being anti-Israel and anti-Zionist and pro-Israel and pro-Zionist. Impossible as it is to be both at the same time, it shows that INOX holds its middle ground. This does not make for a comfortable sitting. However, to sit comfortable shouldn't be an academic's main aspiration. After 11 very successful years in which INOX developed from a small group of scholars into the predominant association in the field, we felt that it is time to address one issue which accompanied us from the beginning, and that is the relationship between the older Holocaust studies and the younger genocide studies as academic disciplines. This, in a way, is a coming-of-age story as well, with all the conflicts and tensions normally associated with it. As father of a teenage daughter, I know what I'm talking about. Now that both disciplines are well established, we can attend to our common ground and to see what we can learn from each other, both in facts and theories, to overcome rivalry and develop true partnership. And again, there can hardly be a better place to do so than Jerusalem. I wish us therefore all a fruitful conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Intersections, different mindsets, diversity, comparison, discussion, and dialogue. I think the general framework of this conference and the tone have been very successfully set. Scientific knowledge is indeed at the core of this conference, but the study of genocide cannot be disconnected from the world which surrounds us. Therefore, prevention emerges as a central keyword. In 2014, the Office of the United Nations Secretary General's Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide issued a framework analysis for atrocity crimes. This document is meant to provide a tool for prevention of atrocity crimes, that is to say genocides, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, to which ethnical cleansing has been added. I'm quoting, "Prevention is an ongoing process that requires sustained efforts to build the resilience of societies to atrocity crimes, By ensuring that the rule of law is respected and that all human rights are protected without discrimination, by establishing legitimate and accountable national institutions, by eliminating corruption, by managing diversity constructively, and by supporting a strong and diverse civil society and a pluralistic media. Failure by the state to provide such protection and guarantees to its population can create an environment conducive to atrocity crimes. End of quote. It is a privilege and a great honor to welcome the Honorable Adama Dieng, the Under-Secretary General Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, who will deliver the keynote speech on this opening session. The Honorable Adama Dieng was appointed to this important function in 2012 by the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. For more than 11 years, Mr. Dieng was Registrar of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Before joining the United Nations, Mr. Dieng was for 10 years the Secretary General of the Geneva-based International Commission of Jurists. Mr. Dieng is a well-acclaimed expert and lecturer on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. He was the driving force behind the establishment of the African Court on Human and People's Rights and produced also the draft of the African Convention to Fight Corruption. He's a member of the Africa Leadership Forum and forum board member of various institutions, including the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, the San Remo Institute of Humanitarian Law, and the René Cassin Institute of Human Rights. He is honorary chair of the World Jewish Project. Allow me to call the Honorable Adama Dieng to proceed to the stage. His Excellency, I invite you to deliver your speech.
Allow me just to have a sip of water. I'm having a bit of a dry. Thank you, Madam Chair. Allow me, as I stand before you in this room, to dedicate my first words to remember a man who is recognized as the founding father of Israel's legal system, a champion of human rights, a man who invited me at his residence here in Jerusalem, and who was so generous in sharing with me many pages of his life from the time he was a lawyer in Jerusalem till his retirement as judge of the Supreme Court of Israel. A man who was also a visiting lecturer in the Hebrew University, Justice Chaim Cohn. To paraphrase Justice Barak, I would like to salute Chaim Cohn's spirit of liberalism, tolerance, and understanding, his spirit of love of mankind, his spirit of civil rights. Chaim Cohn was a true humanist, and I wish his life to be a source of inspiration for members of the legal fraternity, for members of the academia, and may his soul rest in peace. Madam Chair, members of the Conference Steering Committee, members of the International Network and participants, dear colleagues and friends. In today's world, we increasingly see human conflict based on issues of identity, particularly religious identity. religion is often manipulated by vested interests that stand to gain from the terrible consequences of creating divisions between people of different faith, which can go to the extent of encouraging, organizing, and committing atrocity crimes. Largely, the spirit of intolerance that eclipses human reason contributes to religious strife. Not a country in the world, not a single religion, single region is immune from this type of conflicts. We all live in plural societies. Muslim, Hindus, Christian, Jews, Buddhists, paganists, people of all colors, we are simply human beings. States have a responsibility to respect, promote, and protect the human rights of all, including protection from atrocity crimes. States need to put emphasis on the constructive management of diversity. But each of us also has a responsibility. We have to accept that we can belong to different ethnic groups and religions. We may have different opinions. We need to understand and respect each other, and we need to learn how to live in peace. I strongly believe that we can individually combat violence and its incitement by a clear understanding of our common root of existence and our common ultimate goal. Let's not forget that we are one world, we are one humanity. It is against this background that I have accepted the invitation of the International Network of Genocide Scholars. And I'm delighted to be in this holy city of Jerusalem and to pursue the long-standing tradition of cooperation with academia and with organizations like yours that are dedicated to advancing genocide studies. I'm glad that your network has defined itself as a non-partisan community that abstains from promoting politically defined policy agenda. This approach supports the clear, action-oriented dimension of your work as scholars. The United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Defenders enshrines the right of individual academics and relevant institutions to promote understanding, tolerance, peace, and friendly relations among nations and among all racial and religious groups by making the public more aware of questions relating to all human rights and fundamental freedom through education, training, and research. I believe that academics have a specific responsibility to accompany and shape the global movement on the prevention of atrocity crimes, which is the term we use to refer to the crime of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. This responsibility comes, as the title of the conference suggests, from your capacity as scholars to analyze intersections between different agendas and draw conclusions that can help guide practitioners towards the adoption of coherent preventative strategies. You can also draw intersections between different periods of time, extracting lessons from the past that are relevant today and can be used to protect future generations. In recognition of this topic of this year's conference, the starting point of my remark to you will be the Holocaust. In particular, I will underscore how studying the Holocaust and other past atrocity crimes has helped us to understand that genocide develops over a period of time and is a dynamic process, which is the key assumption that informs contemporary policy approaches to the prevention of genocide and other atrocity crimes. Understanding genocide as a process means that we can identify the different stages of the process, the warning signs on the road to genocide, and are thus presented with a range of entry points for action to prevent its occurrence. In other words, and this will be the leitmotif of my presentation, understanding genocide as a process provides a series of opportunities for translating a general political commitment to prevention into concrete actions. In my remarks, I will refer to 3 specific areas of preventative work which, from my perspective, are particularly important. First, I will make the case for national authorities to develop comprehensive national policies on atrocity crimes prevention. Taking into consideration the fact that I am addressing an audience of academics, I will explain how education and research play a critical role within those comprehensive policies. Second, I will highlight the importance of addressing the growing and dangerous trend of incitement to violence, which currently constitutes one of my office priorities. Third, I will elaborate on the imperative of pursuing impunity for the past atrocity crimes and of dealing with the past, which has a strong preventative role. Ladies and gentlemen, your program rightly emphasized the experience of the tragic events that took place in the Ottoman Empire in 1915 and of the Holocaust, which were critical in motivating the young lawyer Raphael Lemkin to develop the notion of genocide, and that ultimately resulted in the drafting and adoption of the 1948 Convention. Holocaust studies, in particular, have provided us with many tough lessons. One key fact that we can take from studying the Holocaust is that genocide is a process that develops over time and requires a plan. And a plan does not come out from irrational thought or a spontaneous outburst. Plans for the physical and cultural elimination of the Jews from Europe in the ultimate form of the Holocaust find their deepest roots in the marginalization and discrimination that was nourished by the Nazis through their ideology. Mass murder was only the last stage in a long process which started with the identification of Jewish persons as distinct individuals, discrimination against them in the workplace, confiscation of their homes and property, dehumanization, and their concentration in ghettos. The Nazi regime also targeted the Roma, the black, the homosexual, and others because of their identity. The genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda and the genocide in Srebrenica confirm it both the same truth. Genocide does not happen overnight or out of the blue. It is a process that takes time and includes plans, steps, policies, deliverables, bureaucratic responsibilities, and timelines for implementation. As such, as I just noted, the process of genocide provides numerous opportunities for prevention before the casualties begin to increase and denials sets in. At every stage in the process, there is action that can be taken to stop the process. Prevention cannot begin when populations are facing an imminent risk of violence. Rather, preventive action has to be taken early to strengthen the resilience of local populations and to address the possible causes of tensions between groups well before these tensions escalate to a point when it becomes difficult to take action. Prevention starts with a sound understanding of the risk present in a specific situation at a given time. In 2014, as we were reminded by our Honorable Chair, my office published an integrated analysis and risk assessment entitled Framework of Analysis on Atrocity Crimes, which I know many of you are familiar with. This framework was developed over a period of 2 years and after thorough research into past cases of atrocity crimes as well as jurisprudence of the courts. Early this year, the framework of analysis was issued as an official document of the United Nations, made available in the 6 official languages and transmitted by the Secretary General to the Security Council and the General Assembly. Slovenia, by the way, has recently published a version of this framework in Slovenian language, and I would be delighted, and I do encourage other states to follow through, and certainly I will be extremely delighted to see Israel also translating this framework into Hebrew. The framework of analysis set out a range of risk factors, both structural and operational, and also indicators, including political, social, and human rights indicators that, if present, point to an increased risk of atrocity crimes, including as a result of the possible escalation of intercommunity violence. On the basis of an increased level of awareness about the risk factors and indicators of atrocity crimes, states can take a plurality of actions to reduce, mitigate, or manage the risk of atrocity crimes. States can foster the national resilience needed to successfully navigate situations of stress before crisis and conflict break out. Indeed, there are a range of structural policy options to address these risk factors, whilst the precise configuration of each national system for preventing atrocity crimes will be and should be different, taking into account the local context and institutional configurations. The 2014 Secretary General report on the responsibility to protect, R2P, identified 7 principal inhibitors to atrocity crimes that ought to be reinforced. 1, professional and accountable security sectors. 2, impartial institutions for overseeing political transition. 3, independent judicial and human rights institutions. 4, capacity to assess risk and mobilize early action. 5, local capacity to resolve conflict. 6, media capacity to counteract prejudice and hate speech. 7, capacity for effective and legitimate transitional justice. And I constantly underline that no state can consider itself immune to genocide. No state is too developed or too democratic. All states should carry out an assessment of their vulnerability. They can also assist other states to strengthen these inhibitors as part of a coherent approach to foreign policy and international cooperation. Preventing rather than responding to atrocity crimes once they occur is rational and cost-effective, and we are increasingly aware of what has to be done. Domesticating the prevention of atrocity crime cannot be improvised. It is a process that necessitates a strategy, specific guidance, skills, and action. A number of states have established dedicated capacities, such as national committees on the prevention of atrocity crimes, or national focal points on the responsibility to protect, with the aim of assisting and coordinating the implementation of actions at the national level in a plurality of policy areas. On the basis of my experience with national authorities, I believe more and more that the key to institutionalizing the prevention of atrocity crimes is to cut across institutional mandates and boundaries. A policy on atrocity crimes prevention, to be effective, should be developed and adopted by all relevant state institutions and line ministries. This necessarily includes those that are responsible for your core business, education, and research. In this area, I am aware of many important initiatives. These include, in particular, activities that promote education on the Holocaust and on the tragedies of Rwanda and Srebrenica. For instance, in my own country, Senegal, the Manual on Education to the Holocaust and the Prevention of Genocide has been translated into 2 of the 6 national languages, namely in Pulaar and Wolof. Let me give you another example that has very much inspired me when I visited Argentina during the course of my mandate. I was very pleased to learn about this country's approach to education on the prevention of genocide and other atrocity crimes, which links teaching on the Holocaust to Argentina's own experience of atrocity crimes, with, at the heart, emphasis on the importance of prevention of potential future crimes. My office is also working with UNESCO to promote a joint project on education to Holocaust and on the prevention of genocide. Our initiative aims to sensitize education policymakers and other high-level education professionals in the formal and informal sectors in all regions of the world on the importance of education on the history and prevention of genocide and related crimes, with a view to the inclusions of this subject on school curricula and providing support for the development of materials. One key objective of education must be to promote the value of diversity in society and respect for the culture, beliefs, and practices of different communities. Too often, when such respect is lacking, tensions can quickly result in polarization of communities. A phenomenon that is both a warning sign of increasing tensions among communities and a trigger of violence is hate speech or inflammatory language used in public discourse or in the media, including the social media, that can constitute incitement to violence. We have seen how hate speech targeting particular population groups, dehumanization of these groups, and dissemination of incitement messages through public discourse and the media facilitated and incited violence in the past, in the Holocaust, and the genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda, for example. We are seeing a dangerous increase in hate speech and incitement today in many situations. I have spoken out against it on several occasions. We are witnessing a rise of anti-Semitism. We are witnessing a rise of Islamophobia. Therefore, I can say that preventing and responding to hate speech and incitement to violence must then be a critical component of any process to diffuse tensions and prevent the fracturing of societies. These are issues that require a comprehensive response by state authorities at different levels, as well as by civil society and community leaders. States are, first of all, under a responsibility to prohibit speech or acts that constitute incitement to violence that could lead to atrocity crimes. It was the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide that first made incitement a crime under international law. I strongly believe that incitement to violence should not only be prohibited, but first and foremost, it should be prevented. The effective prevention of incitement and appropriate response to halt it will save lives. We saw a great example of this in the 2013 presidential elections in Kenya, where the risk of renewed violence was averted by the concerted efforts of national and international actors based on their assessment of what led to the violence in the elections of 2007-2008. Most effective were timely public calls for peace and unity by the candidates and other political leaders, and the dissemination of these messages by a cooperative and creative media. In order to explore ways to prevent and curb incitement to violence, my office developed a policy paper entitled Preventing Incitement to Violence that could lead to atrocity crimes, and you can see that paper, which is available from the website of my office. But that paper has a specific focus, and it shows that when there is such a speech which is being carried on, you have a window of opportunity for preventive action which is still open. What is crucial is that the policy paper identifies practical recommendations addressed to different actors who can play a role in preventing and managing incitement to violence that could lead to atrocity crimes, including states, civil society, including the media, and the international community. And based on our conviction of their special place in society, my office has been working in collaboration with religious leaders from around the world, precisely in relation to the prevention of incitement. This collaboration has resulted in the development of a plan of action, the phase plan of action, which sets out options for actions that religious leaders can take to prevent incitement, working individually and collectively. And over the last year, we have been organizing regional meetings with regional leaders in 5 regions to develop context-specific strategies to implement this plan of action. So far, we have met with religious leaders in Africa, the Americas, Europe, and the Middle East and North Africa, and the next meeting will take place in Indonesia in November with religious leaders from the Asia-Pacific region. And once we have completed all 5 regional consultations, we plan to hold a final meeting to bring the result of all these meetings together and work on implementation. I have spoken about my office initiatives to prevent and counter hate speech and incitement to violence. In addition to the policy work, we are constantly monitoring and responding to specific cases of concern around the world. And not only my office. Just last Sunday, while visiting the Greek island of Lesbos, which has become an entry point for migrants and refugees into Europe, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon reiterated his concern about the outpouring hostility, xenophobia, and intolerance that has accompanied the flux of refugees and migrants to Europe. We have also seen this in response to the terrorist attacks in Europe and elsewhere. 10 days ago, I issued a statement in which I condemned the outpouring homophobia and Islamophobia, including by political and religious leaders, that followed the murder of 49 people in Orlando, Florida. I was shocked by the inhumanity of some of those statements. This manipulation of people's concern for political gain is sickening. And as we know from the past, it is also dangerous. It is fundamental that democratic societies do not fall into the trap of such provocations. I would also like to refer to the continued prevalence of hate speech coming from Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. The Secretary General has condemned specific incidents, such as the decision taken by leaders of Hamas to welcome and by some even to celebrate the vile attack committed in Tel Aviv earlier this month on 8 June, in which 4 Israelis were killed by a Palestinian. He called on the Palestinian leadership to live up their responsibility to stand firm against hate speech and those who incite division and violence. However, the Secretary General also expressed deep concern at the punitive response of the Israeli authorities to the 8 June attacks, which add to a series of measures that may amount to prohibited collective punishment and may correspond to an arbitrary limitation of the freedom of religion or belief. It is my view that these will only increase the sense of impunity, injustice, and frustration of Palestinians at this very tense time. I'm glad that the agenda of this conference includes specific sessions dedicated to discussion on the ongoing conflict in Israel and Palestine, and I trust your proceedings will make a useful contribution to thinking on ways in which the peace process could be advanced. The population of the occupied Palestinian territory has been subjected to human rights violations to varying degrees since the beginning of the occupation in 1967. Human rights violations are not just a symptom of the conflict. They drive the cycle of violence. For there to be an enduring peace, the root causes of the conflict must be addressed. These include addressing the legitimate security concern of Israel, but also finding a way to end the occupation and ensuring accountability for the past violations of human rights and international humanitarian law allegedly committed by all sides. This last reference allows me to introduce a third area that I consider as a key pillar of any effective national policy on atrocity crimes prevention: the fight against impunity and the promotion of the right to truth. Our research into past cases of genocides and other atrocity crimes has shown us that states with a history of atrocity crimes are more likely to return to violence if there is no sense of justice achieved, if there is no sense of accountability. However selective or limited the immediate accomplishment of justice processes for genocide and atrocity crime might be perceived, the critical importance of these efforts for those affected in places such as Rwanda or Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as their long-term impact as a deterrent of future atrocities, must be recognized. It is unimaginable to any of us to conceive a peaceful world in which these violent acts would go unimpeded and unpunished. And moreover, even justice in its traditional meaning is often not enough. Atrocity crimes leave terrible scars on society. History has shown that for societies to heal, there has to be a transitional justice process, a process that links an objective examination of what occurred, i.e. truth-telling, to a judicial process that holds accountable those responsible for crimes committed, and a process of reconciliation and reparation, a healing of the memories. A process of memorialization of the victims of atrocity crimes provide recognition of their suffering and the suffering of those who survive, and prepares the ground for healing and reconciliation. An examination of the past through memorialization contributes to our understanding of the present and should guide our action in the future. In responding to questions of dealing with the past and fighting against impunity, there is one challenge that the international community, including I myself, continue to face. When is it appropriate to qualify a specific event, including from the past, as genocide? And who is responsible for making such an assessment? My position, and that of the Secretary General, is that judicial and not political bodies are responsible for such a determination, which bears important implication in terms of the criminal responsibility of individuals. My position on this point has generated an interesting discussion with several of your colleagues. Several academics have asked why, if the United States State Secretary, Mr. Kerry, was in a position to state that in his own judgment, Kerry was very clear, he didn't say the US administration, but in his own judgment, Daesh is responsible for genocide against groups in areas under its control in Iraq. We in the United Nations cannot come to a similar conclusion. They emphasize that courts take time to complete their adjudication work, and that the law is not always a mechanism of accountability, but rather it can also enable the perpetrators to mask their acts through semantic smoke and mirrors. When engaging with such legitimate questions, my first and foremost concern is to defend the effectiveness and preventative role of my mandate. In my view, placing too much weight on a determination that genocide has occurred can focus attention away from the most important task of doing all that we can to protect those who continue to be the potential targets of this crime. We should spare no efforts to assist the local actors in protecting the evidence, to ensure that mass graves are not corrupted, to protect key witnesses, and so on. That was my response to many ministers of foreign affairs, saying, take action, go and protect these. Don't waste time in debating about whether there is a genocide or not. Don't wait that determination, but take action now. The prevention of the commission of further atrocities is, for instance, the priority of my engagement with the Iraqi authorities. I visited Iraq in November 2015 with the three objectives. First, to encourage national authorities to spare no effort to ensure that there is accountability for atrocity crimes committed in the country. And second, to assess the risk of further atrocity crimes in Iraq and how we can support the Iraqi government and communities at risk. And third, to meet with minority communities who have been particularly targeted by the so-called Islamic State. I was encouraged by my meetings with the authorities, and I was humbled by my meetings with affected communities, and particularly the Yazidi. I was deeply moved by their stories, the stories of the horrors they have been through: killings, rape, torture, forced displacement, the destruction of their communities, simply because of their belief, the belief that they hold, simply because of who they are. It is difficult to grasp that human beings can be so cruel and in such a deliberate way. My visit confirmed my conviction that we should focus our efforts on responding to the immediate needs of these communities while still advocating for national and international accountability processes. And I should say that recently, following the attacks in Fallujah, the attempt to liberate Fallujah, we were pleased to see the Iraqi authorities taking action, including even to arrest elements of the Iraqi forces for having committed crimes against Sunni. So that is very important. So this is to say that I'm committed to continue to work with United Nations colleagues in the country and to see also the options for reconciliation and community-level processes that can support those most affected by the brutality of Daesh, the so-called Islamic State. Dear colleagues and friends, in conclusion, I would simply like to say that the situation of ethnic and religious minorities in Iraq is just one of too many examples around the world today. We are witnessing suffering in Burundi, Central African Republic, Iraq, Libya, Mali, Myanmar, where I was shocked recently by the statement of someone who used to be our icon, the Nobel Peace Prize Aung San Suu Kyi, who is asking that no one use the term Rohingya, denying those Rohingya their right to self-identification. That is very serious. And I was arguing that had another Nobel Peace Prize, Nelson Mandela, not standing, using the Rugby World Cup, maybe we would have witnessed a genocide in South Africa against the white people. But Mandela stood firm, and it is my sincere hope that Nobel Peace Prize Aung San Suu Kyi will use the role model of Mandela. So I would say, therefore, that in addition to those countries I listed, there are also other places too numerous to be mentioned. Simply to say that individuals and communities have been targeted in these places because of their religious or ethnic identity in many cases. In other words, simply because of who they are born into. We owe a solemn pledge to those who have lost their life in such atrocities to do our utmost to prevent future atrocities from occurring. We owe it to their families. We owe it to the survivors and the communities who carry the lasting physical and emotional scars from genocide and other atrocity crimes. We now understand much better what the causes of atrocity crimes are and the warning signs that we should look out for. We know what kind of structural and operational measures states should take to reduce the risk of atrocity crimes and build resilience. We know that the key to prevent atrocity crimes lies in the constructive management of diversity. Let us not continue to repeat the mistakes of the past. Together, let us act now to stop genocide from being part of our present or our future. This is a message which concerns all nations. Our countries and regions are extremely diverse, and it is in this diversity that their richness lies. We must protect this diversity and use it to promote dialogue and understanding, not to spread hatred and intolerance. We must reject the us versus them that is taking hold, fed by systematic fear-mongering from terrorists and violent extremists. I'm confident that your experience and wisdom will result in fruitful discussions during these days. I'm looking forward to engaging with you as a group and bilaterally on how we can strengthen cooperation with my mandate and with the United Nations. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Merci. Thank you, His Excellency, for such an enlightening and inspiring talk. These were very strong remarks, and I was extremely sensitive to your focus on responsibility. Thank you for all the work you are doing for the prevention of atrocity crimes. And you gave us a lot of food for further thoughts. Merci. I wish to thank all of you for your attention. And, well, I just have to wish you a good night. And we all expect a very interesting conference. Thank you.